I'm actually going to have a very different question for you here, Maiya. We talk about next-gen banking, and Tariq talked about, having next-gen customers being central to what we call as next-gen banking. You actually, you've been dealing with banks around the world, and you engage with different markets, different customer segments that are being delivered by those banks. Is next-gen banking ubiquitous? Does it have the same meaning in every part of the world, or is it different? And what, in your view, would actually, your observations from a Middle East context as against, let's say, what we see around the world?
Thanks, Ram. Thanks, Cedar, for inviting me here to be part of this extreme insightful conversation that we're looking at. So from our own perspective, look at Infosys Finacle. It's been used by more than 200 banks in across 100 countries. So that collective experience, what we are seeing is in terms of banking as a content is not changed over the last 400 years. But the container which carries this content has been changing over the last 400 years. Let me explain you in a simple terms. If you look at in terms of way back when people wanted to communicate, they were using, I'm talking about the Stone Age, they used to use the stones to carve out something, and then that was the communication, and many of the Stone Age sculptures are still available for us to read. When the Industrial Revolution took place, that communication started resulting in printing materials or printed materials. Then when the internet came into picture, a lot of them started converting into a media in terms of electronic. But the content, in terms of the intent of communication, has not changed over a period of time. But the containers which are carrying, like a stone or a printed media or an electronic media, that has been changing over a period of time. The same thing applies to banking. Banking as a content has not changed in the last 400 years. What used to be a service provided over the bench by Italian noblemen way back in 1940 or 1500 kind of a time, that has not changed. But from there, it has converted into joint stock companies and banking companies. Now you talk about the startup, the fintech, the big techs. Only the containers are changing. So from a next-gen perspective, the banking still remains. Banking is not changing. But the containers, the provider services keep on changing. We don't even know whether it is going to be big techs or tomorrow somebody else may come and provide those services. If you now look at in terms of the exact definition of what a next-gen will look like, it has to be doing more with the less. Many people think that if a transformation has to happen, if a digital transformation has to take place, you need more resources, more people, more technology. But that is not true. Basically, this is the age of doing more with the less. Actually, less is more. So why you say that? If you now look at in terms of a next-gen service provider in a banking parlance, I'm not talking about the banks. Any provider who's capable of doing it. It can be telco or an insurance company, or it can be a retailer as well. So they're all going to be called next-gen if you are looking at stateless in your architecture, faceless in your interaction, paperless in your documentation, contactless in your communication, and processless in your orchestration. And if you now look at purposeless in your infrastructure, and similarly, if you now look at trustless in security. So it's all less they're talking about is going to make a perfect next-gen bank. And you may ask me, what is that purposeless we have talked about? Okay, we agree about the faceless, the contacts, the cashless, or in terms of the architecture. The purposeless is whenever you build something around a financial service, the infrastructure has to be such that you should not create it with an intent. If you create that with an intent and an objective, that's going to constrain the usage of that. I have a classic example of that where it is happening in India now. India has one of the most sophisticated open banking environment in the world. Any country which has to capture that kind of a phase, it will take minimum 5 years. And the whole infrastructure was built as a purposeless. It was not built keeping in mind that we need to use this for something specific. The moment you do that, it is going to be restricting that and become outdated over a period of time. The entire India stack that has been built by the market infrastructure perspective is a purposeless. If you now look at Aadhaar, 1.3 billion people having the identity. It is not built with a purpose. It was built with basically providing an identity, but today it is now transformed itself in terms of using it for opening a bank account within 60 seconds. That means customer validation, account creation, transaction, everything happening within 60 seconds. And that is in terms of faceless. contactless, paperless, and you don't have to go visit a branch. Similarly, documentation-less. So if you now look at that is being used by the banks, it is being used by the insurance companies, it is being used by the primary healthcare center. The whole vaccination of 2 billion vaccination that was issued in the last 2 years, it has been all based on this Aadhaar as a validating platform. That is purposeless. Similarly, Chetan talked about in terms of the UPI. Today we process more than 7.5 billion transactions per month. It's expected to grow 50% CAGR in the next 5 years. So the 7.5 billion transaction, which is running on a UPI, it is again a purposeless infrastructure. That means what has been built from any wallet to any wallet, any mobile to any mobile, any bank to any bank, any currency to any currency. So that is the kind of the infrastructure that we're looking at. So next gen is going to be like this, which is purposeless, stateless, in terms of contactless, faceless, cashless, documentation-less, and trustless kind of an environment. I'll pause here.